Hey everybody, happy Wednesday morning. Welcome back, and I'm here with my whale blue mug and saucer. It seems to be not just my favorite, but many of yours as well. I think today's video might be one of the most important videos I've made in some time. And I think if we can do a good job of discussing this, it might actually be very impactful and be the sort of missing piece in why so many people have been learning languages for some time, even reaching quite good levels of proficiency, and yet struggle deeply to have successful real-world language experiences and interactions, right? And so when I say a language interaction or a language experience, that could be talking to native speakers or engaging in a community, but it could also be reading a book or watching a film. Any real-world experience that many of us hope to have when learning a language, and it can be very discouraging when we see that we're struggling to have success in that specific endeavor, even after having studied for a long time and maybe even passing a high level of proficiency exam. That's all coming up. Don't go anywhere, and I'll see you in just a sec after I have one more sip of Wednesday morning coffee. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about this idea of soft versus hard language skills. So I haven't seen this anywhere else, maybe it exists, but I think of the core language skills that we always talk about, right? So reading, listening, writing, and speaking, right? Those are, for me, the hard skills in language learning. And they're, of course, very, very important. These are the skills by which we tend to measure someone's level in a language. These are the skills that we test on proficiency exams and in classrooms. And these are the skills we focus on developing when studying a language. But the thing is, if we talk about the goals of language learners, right? What do most people actually want? Well, in my experience, most people are learning languages to have some kind of real world experience that I just talked about, right? Whether that might be working a job and being able to get through business meetings, or whether it be, meeting a partner, or perhaps speaking the language of your current partner, or being part of a community, or reading a book, or diving into the history through documentaries, any of these things. That's what most people are looking for. And the fact is that just focusing on developing those 4 hard skills in language learning, and again, maybe even getting a really good score on a really high level of proficiency exam, it often doesn't actually get people to where they can successfully have those experiences. And myself, for those of you who are new here, I've done that a lot, right? So I've been out in the world a ton. I've lived in 9 countries. I've worked in all 9 countries. I speak Mandarin to be my 9th language, but I've also actually had very real world experiences in Dutch, which I don't count anymore, but I did job interviews in Dutch, and I had to talk to a whole classroom of children in Dutch. And so I've done a lot of these things that I think most people want. And through that experience, I have found that there are a whole set of soft skills, as I like to think of them, that are not part of those 4 core hard skills that are actually instrumental and very, very important when it comes to that end goal that I think most of us have. And I think that that's a missing piece of the conversation at this whole sort of online language learning community at large. And I think that's why so many people that write to me and people I've met throughout my career are perplexed at why they're still struggling so badly to reach their goals. And this is the part where it might get a bit controversial. I want to be clear. I am not saying that the research that has been done around language acquisition, right, or language testing, any of these things, I'm not saying they are wrong, bad, irrelevant. I'm not giving a blanket criticism of them. But I do think that they fail to correctly interpret the importance of these soft skills. And I think it's led to a bias in a general opinion that exists, right, which is heavily based on things like extensive reading. Now, as I've talked about recently, I think extensive reading is extremely powerful. I also think applying a similar approach to listening is extremely powerful. So extensive reading being where you're reading at a very high level of comprehension, ideally 98%, and where you're reading a text and you're not looking up words. You're mostly focused on trying to cover an extensive amount of material. You're relying on seeing the same words over and over again. You're relying on guessing and figuring out meaning through context. And again, doing something very similar for listening can be very powerful. The problem is that through this, a lot of people now look down on more intensive approaches to studying a language. A lot of people see that as inferior. And many of you will know, I do a lot of that stuff that people think is inferior, and yet I have had great success learning languages, but also really going out there and speaking them in the world. And I've also had a lot of success helping other people do the same. And so I think the disconnect is that people don't understand or think about how valuable the struggle is that you get when dealing with more challenging content. And I'm going to talk about that next. So some people have said to me recently that, by studying difficult stuff, it just makes you feel like you're improving, and that's really all it does. But I think that completely misses the point of why it's really healthy to have a mixture of extensive and what I'm going to call intensive approaches. Because the first soft skill that you develop through having struggle as part of your language learning experience is that you become comfortable with ambiguity. You become comfortable with maybe not understanding every word and not even close to 98% of the words. You develop a really high tolerance for stress in language situations, right? And so let me give you some examples. I have worked as an interpreter in Japanese. Now, I did not have formal interpreting training for Japanese, right? I developed very high level skills in Japanese completely by myself and through taking some college classes, but they weren't super helpful. And my first day in Japan, I worked as an interpreter and I did a whole bunch of assignments. I did things like immigration interpreting. I helped people set up housing contracts, phone contracts, storage contracts. And I even worked with a broken family who had been torn apart after World War II, and I helped them rebuild relationships. Now, I did not understand close to 98% in almost any of those interpretation scenarios, and they were extremely high stakes and high stress. Another example is that when I was in France, I had this dream of being a part of like a typical French dinner party. And that happened one day. So it was me and about 6 other people, all working professionals. It was like 3 other young couples and then me and my friend. And everybody was a native French speaker, and it was an extremely intense evening for me, right? Everyone was speaking at full speed, all the slang, all the idioms, people were drinking, eating, there was music, it was loud, and I was being pulled into so many different small conversations and expected to participate in a whole variety of topics ranging from politics to local education, legislation, all kinds of stuff at a moment's notice, and it was extremely stressful, and I understood nowhere near 98%. I also used to work as a French customer service agent for Expedia France, being shouted at all day long by very angry, frustrated French-speaking travelers. And I even once had to go through an entire job interview in Dutch and then speak to 3 classes of students in Dutch when my level was nowhere near advanced. But the thing is, I was incredibly successful in all of these scenarios. And that's because I had developed this level of tolerance for these type of stressful situations. I had developed a certain comfort in ambiguity, in not understanding every single word. And that was absolutely vital in staying in all these conversations, in being able to be confident and calm enough to not give the game away. And then that leads me to my second soft skill, which is developing the ability to recognize key words in a conversation. This is a real skill. Now, it requires the first skill. You have to be able to stay calm. And as someone's speaking, and as you're only understanding, 70%, 75%, you need to be able to sort of pick out those key words that help you to stay in the conversation. You pick out the key words that help you figure out, all right, okay, so we're still talking about education, okay, we're talking about education here in Lyon, and then being able to recognize when it's your turn to speak and you have just enough context to be able to participate and for no one to really know that maybe you didn't catch everything. That leads me to my third soft skill, which is developing a sense for very subtle things about, in this case, real conversations. Subtle things about the tone of people's voice, the gestures they make with their body, things like this, and understanding when it's time to laugh or when it's not time to laugh or when it's your turn to speak. These are all things as well that you develop through putting yourself in challenging conversations where you're forced to really interpret the finer nuances of these interactions. The fourth soft skill is the ability to guess. Now, you get really good at guessing, right, when you're frequently forced to guess and when you're relying on those guesses quite heavily, and when you also have to sort of check those guesses, and you get really good at guessing the meaning of things, again, especially in stressful situations. And that's not just conversations. It's quite stressful reading one of these novels. These are all French, these are Japanese, these are Italian, German, Swedish. That's stressful reading those novels. And again, through facing that type of content in a healthy way, you get good at guessing. I would also say that switching languages falls into this category. Switching languages almost feels like a different skill. You get very good at switching between these different linguistic contexts, and that's something that lots of people struggle with, and they're surprised that, hey, my French is really good, but I struggle terribly switching back to my native language or vice versa. And that leads me to my last point today, which is that the interesting thing about these soft skills in language learning is that I have found they are very transferable across languages. They are language agnostic. So if you learn German really well and you speak English as a native language, well, if you learn Swedish or Dutch, a lot of that's going to transfer, but that's language specific. That's just because the languages happen to have a lot of overlap. But the soft skills in language learning are actually quite transferable and they're language agnostic. So once you develop this sort of stress tolerance and the ability to stay calm and a level of comfort as words are flying past you and you're picking out the key words and staying in the conversation or parsing all these different factors into just enough meaning, well, that transfers when you start learning a new language. You still have that ability, right? Getting really good at switching between languages, for example, it's almost separate and it almost so it seems to stay with me, for example, as I go between languages. The ability to guess things, right? That seems to also largely stick with me. And the other reason why this is so important, if we look at the inverse, is that I have met lots of people, and I mean a lot, who have scored very highly on proficiency exams and who have used, exclusively things like extensive reading, and they've really bought into that. And they believe comprehensible input has to be input that is packaged at 98% comprehension. They believe that you have to always find content that's already perfect comprehensible input. I've talked recently how I believe you can also make hard stuff comprehensible and then study it, right? There's more than one ways to get comprehensible input. But people who have only relied on things like extensive reading, what happens is when they end up in a real world conversation, a real world scenario, like the ones I've described, I've watched this happen. Those people tend to panic. They crumble because they are not used to the ambiguity, right? They are comfortable understanding 98% of a text or 98% of a podcast. They're not comfortable at all once they start, getting in a situation where they're not understanding 98%. They panic. They have a very low stress tolerance. They're not good at parsing meaning out of these things. They're not good at identifying the key words, partly because they're so stressed. And so I've seen lots of those people struggle greatly in those real world experiences that they hoped to have through learning the language. I met so many people in Japan who had passed the JLPT N1, the highest level of proficiency exam, and they could barely get through a basic conversation. They had no chance in the type of situations that I described to you at the start of this video. Even though they may have known more grammar than me, they may have had a much larger vocabulary than me, they could certainly read better than me, but they were missing all these soft skills, and that completely prevented them. Whereas for me, as I described with Dutch, right, where I definitely did not have the appropriate level to be doing full-scale job interviews in that language, I was able to get through that successfully because of these soft skills I had developed. So that's my message today. I hope that doesn't upset anybody. I'm totally open to having some healthy discussion, but I think that when people, look down on intensive approaches to learning and they say, oh, you're just feeling like you're making progress, and that's all it is, it's a mental trick, I think you're missing the point so much. And this is why so many people are reaching these high levels of proficiency on certain metrics, but they are not able to have the experiences that it seems like they actually want, and that's why they're learning the language to begin with. And so to clarify in closing, I do not think that any of these extensive approaches or any of that research is wrong or bad. I'm not criticizing them in a blanket way. What I'm saying is, I think they're missing a certain piece, and I believe that the best approach is a balanced approach. It's an approach that understands what those other, methods are great at and when we should use them and why we should use them, but it also takes into account that we also need a healthy dose of struggle, that we also need to develop and actively try to get good at these soft skills as well. Okay, everybody, if you like this video, please do subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you in the next video.